was December 4th, 2015, when my building had a 2-alarm fire. I had just been laid off from 2 jobs, moved back into my parents' home, and lost my US work visa. Nothing was going the way that I had expected it to. I felt like I'd been spending many years climbing this upward ladder and just building and building, and all of a sudden, my life crashed. Boom. It's like as if I hit rock bottom. When I found out that it was going to take several months to repair my home, I figured, well, there's no better time than now to go on an eat, pray, self-love trip. So I traveled to India, Bali, and Thailand, and really tried to rediscover myself, figure out, who am I? What's my purpose here? When I came back with more questions and answers, I realized that success isn't about climbing that upward ladder and checking off those boxes. Success is about how well we can adapt to life quakes. They're basically those major disruptions that we endure throughout our lives, usually right before we're about to reinvent ourselves. How many of you are doing what you thought you'd be doing 3 years ago, or even just 1 year ago? We're in the middle of what I call the reinvention revolution. We're being forced to reinvent ourselves faster and more frequently than ever before. How can we be more proactive in that reinvention process instead of being reactive? How can we use innovation to drive personal growth and not just economic growth? We often focus too hard on the final product or the invention when it comes to innovation. We often forget about the personal transformation process that is necessary in order to innovate. While I was writing my book, I went out and I interviewed 100 innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders around the world. And I realized that it's really time to redefine innovation. Innovation isn't just about technology. It's about being human, and it starts with I. Let's look at Steve Jobs. This iPhone isn't innovation. Innovation was the personal transformation process that Steve Jobs went through during his time in India. Steve Jobs often emphasized the importance of practicing introspection and really trying to understand ourselves and go deeper within ourselves instead of simply looking outward. Innovation is all about having self-awareness and knowing who we are. 12 years ago, I graduated from college into a financial crisis. I found a volunteer opportunity to go to Brazil and work in an orphanage with kids. But right before my flight down there, my new boss said, Saleema, I want you to stay in Rio de Janeiro and build a language school, start this language school that we can use to finance the orphanage because our orphanage is in really bad shape. It was not easy to start that language school from scratch in Brazil. It was really fulfilling and I was really driven to do it. But my fellow volunteers and I, we lived in this small room full of bunk beds. We didn't have internet. And on most days, we didn't even have any water. Our business model started out as, hey, we're a bunch of foreign volunteers. Let's teach all the languages we know and get the school started. We were teaching Dutch, German, Italian, everything that we knew. A couple months in, our business model was failing. Our classrooms were empty, and what were supposed to be group classes were now turning into private lessons. We were about to call it quits, but we were like, well, wait a second. Let's figure out what we can do. Let's see if we can figure out our sweet spot and make a pivot. We said, you know what, we're doing too much. Let's drop all those other languages, stop teaching the German, the Dutch, the Italian, the French, and just focus on Portuguese for foreigners. When we made that pivot, the school immediately took off. We actually became one of the top-rated schools in Brazil for teaching Portuguese. And many other schools in Latin America replicated our model of social innovation. If you're in the process of self-discovery or reinventing yourself, I created this tool called sweet spot mapping. I want you to take a whiteboard or a flip chart or even just a piece of paper and look at your life as a series of projects. Look at your career as a portfolio and think about what are some of the projects that you've excelled at? What are some of those projects that you've gotten really positive feedback for? What are some of those projects that gave you a lot of joy, that you really enjoyed doing? And this last one, what are some of those projects that you're open to testing? What are some of those ideas that keep you up at night? What are some of those projects on your back burner? Stop quieting those inner voices. When we made that pivot, it was not easy and decided to focus on Portuguese. It was just amazing to see how things just immediately changed and things really took off. But it did require testing. Our sweet spot isn't necessarily discovered, it's developed. It's not supposed to be easy to find our sweet spot. We do have to work at it. Making that pivot wasn't easy. And even just going to Brazil was well out of my comfort zone. But as we work at it, we get better and we discover. We really find our sweet spot and we actually work and improve it as well. So when I was done with Brazil and the school was up and running, I moved to the south of Italy, to a town called Reggio di Calabria. I've done all this volunteering, now it's time to start earning a living. I would study Italian in the mornings and walk around Reggio di Calabria with a folder full of translated resumes and knock on doors trying to find a job. Didn't really work. Reggio Calabria was also suffering from long-term unemployment, brain drain, and to make things worse, it was right at the start of the Euro crisis. I started working in a restaurant kitchen on my first day and realized very quickly that my signature chicken fettuccine alfredo was useless. It was actually considered a sin to mix the chicken and pasta. And I also realized that Caesar salad didn't exist. They didn't call me back after that first day. I then tried to teach English. I'm Canadian, I was like, let me figure this out and I can teach English. And I was rejected because I didn't have a British accent. I was in survival mode. My brother gave me some advice. He said, you speak all these languages. Since you can't use your college degree, why don't you use your languages to do some freelance translation work online? I'd sleep with my laptop under my pillow, trying to be the first person to apply to those translation projects every night. And within just a few months, I pivoted from being this freelance translator, trying to take everything that I could get, to building a team and starting one of the leading translation agencies to help other businesses expand their digital presence. We don't necessarily have to find that big idea. We don't necessarily have to come up with something, amazing to start with. We can just start with ourselves. And if you're in that process of reinventing yourself, I recommend you follow active introspection, which I'm going to explain to you right now. The first thing that you want to do is you want to reflect on what makes you unique. What are some of your skills, your values, your passions, your experience? What do people say that you're great at? What are some of your greatest accomplishments? What really frustrates you about others? And what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Number 2, give value to others wherever you can. We really need to prioritize giving. Whether it's doing some volunteer work, whether it's doing something pro bono or giving back to the community in some way, we learn a lot about ourselves by giving to others. Number 3, embrace failure. Failure is part of the path to success. When I got rejected for not having a British accent, or I realized that I couldn't cook traditional Italian food, I moved on. I let go. And I said, well, what can I do? And I scaled back and said, let's do translation. And number 4, make a pivot when it's time to. Great ideas don't start great. They become great through cycles of iteration and learning. Also, listen to your inner voice when it comes to pivoting. You'll probably hear something if you really pay attention to it so that you can be more proactive about it instead of reactive. So we don't need to search outside necessarily to find a big problem to solve in order to innovate. We can start with ourselves. Innovation starts through reinventing ourselves. So, about that story that I opened up with the fire, losing my job, I didn't tell you the rest of that story. So when I came back from my trip, my Eat, Pray, Self-Love trip, I was coming back from Bali. And as I mentioned, I'm Canadian. I was actually denied entry into the United States. I never thought that would ever happen to me. I considered the United States my home. It was one of the hardest things. I tried again to come in the next day, and the immigration officer, Mario, he was like, I'll give you 2 weeks to find a job that will sponsor your visa. I thought it was going to be impossible, but I contacted everybody I knew in Washington, D.C., and I said, hey, I'm looking for a job that will sponsor my visa. Can you help me? I ended up setting up 8 to 10 coffees a day throughout Washington, D.C. It was pretty empowering, that experience. It inspired me to call it the 100 Coffee Challenge. If you're stuck or you're in that process of reinventing yourself, go on a 100 Coffee Challenge. Talk to 100 people. Have meaningful conversations with people that you know, people that you don't know, and especially people that are outside of your industry. During one of my coffees, I did something different. I decided to be more vulnerable. I decided to share a little bit more about myself. It was hard because I was a bit embarrassed about the situation, but I was like, hey, let me try this out. And my colleague really empathized with what I was going through. She happened to be working with the refugee crisis in the Middle East and North Africa. Have you ever had a conversation with someone that changed your life when you least expected it to? That's what happened. That conversation actually led to several years of very impactful work. Imagine you wake up one morning and you lose everything you have. Your home, your family, your friends, everything that you invested your entire life in. There are nearly 80 million forcibly displaced people around the world. And they're people just like you and me. But they face food insecurity, water shortages, nutrition deficiencies, harsh land and climate conditions. They often lack electricity. And many of them are unemployed. So my colleague during that coffee said, Saleema, I need you to find a solution to help these refugees grow nutritious food in the desert, in these really water-scarce regions. And the solution has to use very little water and absolutely no soil. I was thinking, whoa, I know nothing about growing plants. I can barely keep my air plants alive. I knew nothing about the industry, agriculture. But being displaced myself, I was very passionate about helping other people that had been displaced. So I ended up doing several months of research, trying to figure out what can we do. I was looking at aeroponics, aquaponics, 3D printing, some really disruptive high-tech technology. And it was quite fascinating. It was very, very sophisticated. I learned a lot. But none of that was feasible. We couldn't imagine actually taking some of that technology and bringing it to the conditions we were dealing with. We were about to fail and had almost given up. And then one day we decided, well, let's apply this 100 Coffee Challenge. Let's talk to other industry experts. Let's build our team. Let's go visit the situation in those countries. Who knew that putting together some pipes, a solar panel, a pump, really basic materials, seedlings, growing medium, could actually allow the refugees to grow the food. It's called simplified hydroponics, and there's many systems. But we would have never figured that out if we hadn't really taken the time to understand the situation and view it from different lenses. We don't necessarily need to create new things when we're innovating. Innovation is all about leveraging existing things and putting them together in new ways. Refugees and hydroponics, they're not new phenomena. But no one had actually taken that exact combination and put them together. So it all starts with a small dose of empathy and doing a 100 Coffee Challenge, really trying to understand a problem or a situation from different lenses. Talking to other people can go a really, really long way. It also starts with being vulnerable and sharing that bit about us that makes us human. Applying the 100 Coffee Challenge to other situations, for example, when I got stuck when I was writing my book, I decided to interview 100 people. Several of my students and interns, whenever they're looking for a job, they do the 100 Coffee Challenge. It can go a really long way. When we have those meaningful, authentic conversations, we learn about ourselves through the lens of other people. Innovation starts with self-awareness. It starts with knowing who we are, what we want, and where we want to go. When we really master that I, we'll be able to thrive on an individual level, we'll be able to impact the people around us, and we'll be able to better contribute to solving the world's complex challenges. And I just want to emphasize here that even though innovation starts with I, it happens with the we. The power happens When we bring together teams, communities, we bring together people. Great minds think differently. And I just want to also say that whenever I try to do anything on my own, I failed miserably at it in all the stories I shared. So even though it starts with I, it happens with we, and together we can have a ripple impact on the world. Before I leave you today, I want you to think of some of those ideas that you've been keeping on the back burner. What are some of those ideas that you're open to testing? In what ways can you add value to those around you? And who are some of those people that you want to connect with in your own 100 Coffee Challenge? As we all contribute to shaping the world's future, we don't need more thought leaders. We need more active leaders. Thank you.